Do we get the poor little Belgium? You got all propaganda? Perfect. All right. I'll show you this one about American posters. Yeah, poor little Belgium would be such a propaganda tool, and Germans would be really resentful of this, even though they did do this. Then, of course, the Allies exaggerated. But Germany's going to deny this, especially after World War II. So they could say, well, okay, we were really bad in World War II, but World War I, we weren't bad. Come on. So, a couple things here really quick about this conflict. Right. So, as the Germans swept in here, the French attacked right here. And that was the Plan 17. And this would be known as the Battle of the Frontiers. And to say it was a French disaster is an understatement. 500,000 casualties. They only gained a few miles. It was a disaster. The French refused to change the color of their uniforms despite the new weapons. So that's the way they look. There's color film from this era. There are color pictures. But no one's really sure how they did it, because in the 30s, it switched and they forgot that technology. So we have some color. Just don't know how they did it exactly. But they thought a glint of steel in French bravery, but French bravery charging into fixed German positions, was a slaughter. And the French attack failed miserably. And so the Germans kept driving. Well, the British entered the war. The British had a tiny army. They sent about 100,000 men. But the Germans had 3 million men attacking. And this was a drop in the bucket. And right here in a place called the Mons, the first British forces met the German advancing forces. But here's where the Battle of the Frontiers was. There's Liège. And the British were just overwhelmed, just surrounded and overwhelmed. And the big thing about the British was, after this, they realized, we can't win this war, escape and don't lose our army. They started marching south towards the Mediterranean. They weren't going to stop. Here are British forces on the march. That's the Battle of the Mons right there. And let's jump right to this. While this is going on, the idea was it would be 6 weeks before the Russians attacked. They did it in 3. An amazing effort. They put every man to the front. Half of the men didn't have rifles. And the average number of bullets each man had was 5. With a bolt action rifle and a clip, you could fire five bullets in about 30 seconds. And that's all they had. But they attacked anyways. The Russians attacked into Austria, which blew up their plan to attack Serbia. And they attacked here. The Germans freaked out. Visions of Russian cavalry in Berlin, they actually weakened this force to try to stop the Russians, which totally goes against the Schaefer plan. They were actually on trains when arguably the most important battle of the century took place. The Battle of Tannenberg. Now it's over about 2 weeks, but in reality, the 23rd, 24th, the biggest day of the battle. So this right here is the eastern part of Germany. And the Russians were attacking like this. They had over 350,000 troops. The Germans had maybe 100,000 troops total. But the Russians had bad communications, bad intelligence, you name it. They had all sorts of problems advancing. So, and then all the supply problems. So advanced here, what the Germans did is they took all the forces here, concentrated them here, outflanked the Germans, and would win a decisive victory. We're not going to go into all the details of the battle, but it was I thought I put down decisive victory. Absolutely decisive victory. And the big thing about this battle was the Germans were thinking this battle would be after the big battle in France, a decisive victory for the Germans. The Germans thought this big battle would be in the middle of September. It happened in the middle of August, a decisive victory. And this would change everything they would do for the rest of the war. No matter what happened in France, their feeling was, well, we've won half of the war already. There'd be another battle called the Masurian Lakes right here. The point is the Russians would be devastated. But they stayed in the fight because they actually did really well in Austria. So here are German forces on the march in France. And just like they feared. They were exhausted, there were supply problems. The plan was breaking down. These are French forces on the charge. These are British forces on the retreat. But then the French turned and counterattacked with their last reserves at the Battle of the Marne. And this is because it's known as history as the left turn. German forces were supposed to sweep around Paris, but they weakened it because of Tannenberg, and they're still on trade for the Battle of Tannenberg. So instead of sweeping around Paris, the right wing went to the east of it, opening their flank to Paris, all the troops in Paris, and the French counterattacked. The French commander, Joffre, went to the British commander, whose name was, not making this up, William French. The commander of the British was French. The lead name was French. You don't need to know that. It's a funny little story, but convinced French to turn his forces around. So even though the British army was tiny, it kept the British in the fight. That's really important. The British were marching to the Mediterranean. They were going south. Now, the Germans fought off the counterattacks, but they realized the Schlieffen plan was failed. So strategically, long term, a huge Allied victory, British and French victory. The Marne was a big victory because the Schlieffen plan had failed. The Germans pulled back to this green line here of dug trenches. It wasn't a green line actually running through France, but this is the high road. So they could take the high road. And the reason why you have to have two things now. Number one, the Germans dug in. Their plan had failed. They should have sued for peace right there. But the Germans won at Tannenberg. So they stayed. Because they won at Tannenberg, they thought they could win a massive victory in the east. And who knows what else? They're hoping to scoop up a couple sections of Belgium. Who knows? They should sue for peace right there. Second part you have to add to this. The French plan had failed. They barely held on. But because of the Marne, the British and the French stayed in the fight. Everyone got that? Because of the Marne. That's why two of the most important battles in history would happen right here. But Tannenberg is so important. By every rational measure, the Germans should have dropped out. But they stayed in the fight. And by staying in the fight, it would turn into a long 4-year battle that would change the world forever. Tannenberg is that important. And then Russia was insane. Just completely insane. Nicholas could not stomach the defeat. So, the next point of this would be called the race to the sea. And this is one of the bloodiest times of the war. Bloodiest time. Because what happens is here. Here's where the Germans pulled back. And what happened is both sides tried to outflank each other. They couldn't do it, and then they ran into the North Sea. And then they dug trenches. Still. And this would be the line on the Western Front, for the most part, for the next 4 years. 1 million men would die on the Western Front. And they learned very quickly, you're out in the open. So dig in. Especially the Germans. Because now the Germans have a big hunk of France, and their plan now is to hold out. So that would be still. So 1914, war of movement. Both sides thought the war would be over very quickly, and now it ended in hell. Watch this. Move on. So that's we have the beginnings of the so-called Allies, or you see them sometimes as the Entente powers, or and against the Central Powers. And the Central Powers, Central Europe, Italy, stay neutral. And then later on, they'll join somebody else. Here's another one of those maps. Here's a German one from 1915. And I love this one. Here's Russia reaching in and the Germans cutting the hand off. Tannenberg. And now it's got to be pro-Austrian, stopping the Russian advance. Here, taking part of France, and they show France as only like a tin soldier. Creepy Sweden. Okay, so I don't think Sweden's, but immediately with both sides, They couldn't win the battlefield the way they thought widen the war. Almost immediately. In 1914, war immediately spread to the colonies. All these red colonies here are German colonies. And so the Allies tried to figure out a way to attack them. It all kind of failed miserably. But the wars would rage, the battles would rage here. Heck, in what is now Tanzania, German, Southeast Africa. The German forces here would not surrender until 1914. About 4 or 5 months after the war ended. They didn't know the war had ended, and they kept fighting. So we have colonies all over, and there's German colonies in Jiao right here with a German city. They took China before the open door. They had islands. What's called Kaiser Wilhelm Land, which seems almost amusing to me. There's a German East Asian fleet there. And because of that, British ally Japan joined the war on the side of the Allies. They immediately attacked German territory in the Pacific, like the Marianas, islands like Saipan and Tinian. Those of you who have read ahead in world American history and know anything about World War II might have heard of those islands. And there would be, they just missed their fleet, the German East Asian fleet, and they began to sail across the Pacific, defeated a British naval force off of Chile. Then they were destroyed off the Falkland Islands right here, World War. And then the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the Central Powers. Both sides tried to sweeten the pot to try to get the Ottoman Empire into the war. And Britain had always been relatively friendly, but that began to change because of German investment. The British kept a couple of dreadnoughts that they were making for the Ottoman Empire. They just kept them. And Germany convinced them, we'll give you land. We'll give you what you want. The big thing that the Ottoman Empire wanted, here and this area here. The Ottoman Empire wanted the stands. They literally called it that. Now it's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, etc. 1915, Italy. Everybody promised Italy something. But the Allies, in secret agreements, promised all kinds of stuff. Hunts of Austria, it's called the Dalmatian coast, islands, colonies, and Italy joined the Allies. So put down A. I don't know why I didn't write down Allies. Bulgaria jumped in the war for the Central Powers. Bulgaria jumped in, and that'd be the last of the Central Powers. Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Ottoman Empire. Soon we have a worldwide war, and there's fighting all over the globe. And eventually, all the countries in black in this really distorted Mercator projection would join the Allies in some way. Greenland is not this big. The Mercator projection. So, 1915, Germany's plan was this. We got the West, dig trenches, hold deep, long-lasting trenches. Hey, if you have defenses, you don't need as many men. Pull out men, because remember, they are outnumbered. And knock Russia out. But also, remember Serbia? The whole thing was about Serbia in the beginning. Austria attacked Serbia, and then not only were they defeated by the Serbs, here come the Russians. They decided, we're going to help the Austrians defeat Serbia. And they would brutally conquer Serbia. That's part of the reason they convinced Bulgaria to join in. You help us attack Serbia, we'll give you pieces of Serbia, which is now today Macedonia. The Allies, they told their people, a little more sacrifice and we'll drive the Germans out, defeat German aggression once and for all. But they weren't telling the truth. Britain had to build an army. Britain had virtually no army when the war began. You can't just all of a sudden put rifles in people's hands and throw them in the combat. Well, I guess you can, but they'll be slaughtered. They need to train officers, men, and build munitions. And they had to frantically do it. The British Army would not be ready to fight until 1916. So they lied to their public and said, we will soon push the Germans out, when they knew there's no way they could probably do it. The French are going to attack, but they don't have enough men to do it. So they're going to use a blockade. Now, the Allies are smart. They're not going to blockade here. They'll blockade here. So there'll be no threat of the German Navy coming out and getting the blockaders so far back here. Here, here, and then eventually, basically all along this coast. Now, the thing is, they're going to stop any ship going to Germany and eventually going to the Netherlands too, which maintain neutrality, and it's kind of a safety valve for Germany for a while. They're going to stop any ship that's carrying goods that can help the German war effort. Can anybody think of a product that wouldn't help the German war effort? Well, they use shares. You got to sit on something, don't you? You get my point? Everything. We're going to stop everything. Has everyone got that? So add this to the blockade. That means they're going to stop ships from neutral countries. Let me give you an example of a neutral country at first. The United States. They're going to stop ships. So pretty soon, the United States is only going to be trading with the Allies because of that blockade. Germany will try to blockade themselves. Also, Russia's got to build up weapons. They got to build munitions. And the Allies are thinking, okay, we'll help them, but it won't be until 1916 that there's going to be any large-scale munitions productions in Russia. But if they can crack their way through the Ottoman Empire, right here at the Dardanelles, there's a little place here called Gallipoli, force open this, they can start shipping Russia supplies, and Russia might be able to attack again and take pressure off of France. So that is what we call on the periphery. Find places on the periphery, like if Italy can threaten Austria, Gallipoli, into the Ottoman Empire, attack on the sides. They even talked about maybe doing a land invasion up here. So it's called the Jutland Peninsula right there. Kind of crazy looking back at it, but they're planning all this stuff. So you've all heard of fronts where the two armies have met. This is a creation of World War I, the fronts. And look at all the fronts. It's kind of shocking. Just listen right now. By the end of 1915, there's going to be the Western Front, the Italian Front, the Russian Front, the Balkan Front, the Palestinian Front, the Mesopotamian Front, and the Caucasus Front. Soon the Romanian Front. There's fronts all over the globe. And one more thing about that. Meteorology was a brand new, relatively imperfect science to this day. And you can imagine how important it would be to know the weather during a war. For any number of reasons. So meteorology was just being created, and now we have all this talk about fronts. What do you call a cold air mass that runs into a warm air mass? A front. Have you ever heard that term from weather? Because they were directly copying what was going on in World War I. They called that a front, like the battle between cold and warm air. And we're going to have a cold front coming through here pretty soon. It's supposed to get anywhere from 40 to 50 below zero. So moving on, I made that. Sometime there will be non cold. It is supposed to cool down a little bit. So on the Russian front, it happened. The German and Austrian army destroyed the Russian army at Tarnow and Gorlice, right about here, which is now in present-day Poland. Absolutely devastated. The Russians thought the Austrians were weak, which they were correct. Tried to do an invasion right here. They got outflanked, outmaneuvered, and destroyed. The outcome of this battle would be so decisive that the Russians would lose something like 150,000 square miles. They'd pull back to here. Russia should have dropped out of the war, but they didn't. I think you might see a revolution coming in Russia very soon because of this. Tarnow and Gorlice is just one of those victories where the German commander, Paul von Hindenburg, would become the head of the German army in a year and a half because of this. The Italians attacked into Austria. The only problem with the Italians they had, their army was very poorly trained, a lot of cronyism in their officer class. And what kind of terrain is it right here? My little pictures here should give you a hint. What mountain range is here? They're called the Julian Alps, for the Alps. No, I've been here, but I haven't been here. I guess it is just stunningly beautiful. There's 14,000 foot peaks, And then because it rains so much, there's rivers, these deep river valleys. So I guess it's just unreal, but imagine finding a valley along these. We have 2,000 or 3,000 foot cliffs where you're fighting in glaciers. They are still finding bodies or to this day. They just found 6 Italian soldiers about a year and a half ago that were buried in a glacier. As the glaciers retreat because of climate change, they found these bodies. But the point is another stalemate. And Italy would lose hundreds of thousands of men and be humiliated. They never really recovered. They're going to be part of the victorious allies, but they feel as though that their men were mistreated, abused, they were ignored after the war. I wonder if a political ideology will develop out of this resentment Italy will have, called fascism. The answer is yes. Now the Ottomans, Britain and France thought they would collapse really easy. One good hard push, they would collapse. They would flow into the Black Sea, get Russian weapons, be able to attack in the Balkans. I mean, all these great plans didn't happen at all. There's going to be 2 fronts, the Palestinian and Mesopotamian front. You don't need to write these down, but 2 fronts, and both of them were stalemate. Heck, the Ottomans even tried to take the Suez Canal and almost did it. Stalemate, well into the middle of 1917. The point is, the Ottomans fought hard. There's also another one, they tried to attack into the Caucasus. And that was a disaster. And soon the Russians are pushing into the Ottoman Empire. This one we have to talk about again, because this is going to lead to one of the most horrific events in world history. But this is what I do want you to get down. Write down the Arab Revolt. The British were able to convince Arabs, especially starting down here, a place called the Hijaz, but Arabs who live in this whole area, ethnically different than the Ottoman Turks, to rebel against the Ottoman Empire. And they promised them an independent Arab state. The Arab state, not really clear where it would be, the capital probably Damascus, but they promised them this state if they rebelled. The British did help, most famously by sending a guy named Thomas Edward Lawrence, best known as Lawrence of Arabia. But would the British and French give them independence? No, absolutely not. And you start seeing the events that would lead to what's going on in the Middle East today. We can thank the British for so many things. And then one more thing to add. Gallipoli. The British came up with a great idea. When I mean great, I mean horrible. To attack into the Black Sea at the Dardanelles right here. Gallipoli. Okay, this map's a little bit awkward, right here. They thought if they could force their way past the capital Constantinople, today Istanbul. We know what Istanbul? Constantinople is the Roman name. Istanbul is Greek. See. But attack through here. And the British are going to send forces. What were you? To Gallipoli. And this would turn into 9 months of hell and stalemate. Everyone got that? 9 months of hell and stalemate. The British would attack, and they would use Australian and New Zealand forces, imperial forces, and they only captured a few miles. And those are Australian forces on the march. It was a disaster. Basically, this rocky peninsula, they have no idea what they're doing. Place I really want to go to.
You said that was.
I'll finish the rest of this tomorrow. Yeah.
Ottomans was the British and who else?
Say it again. The British and the French. But Australians and New Zealanders are part of the British Empire. Out of this, it's going to come Australia. The country of Austria will be created at Gallipoli. Be a big Turkish victory. And I bet we have one student who knows who the big hero was. You know who? Who? No, you know a person?
Was it?
It was a country starter.
What's her name?
It's Coco Camaro.
Yeah. I love things like that. It's so funny. Can you tell me that you love me? How do you say that?
If you
So tomorrow you're gonna have to tell the class.
I will?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he would make a stand on that first day.
Yeah?
Yeah, and
Been learning about it since fourth grade.
you have no choice, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm always like.
Yeah, and he pretty, it's pretty basic. I'm shutting off the camera, people. Faster.
I didn't know. Yep, sounds good.
The map is done.
Map's done.
Any questions?
Oh my gosh.